alongside all of our stakeholders across the greater region to help with our recovery, our collective recovery to the impacts of COVID. And that is on our Play Active Rec and Sport system. On the call, we have a guest. One of the guests is Colin Stone. So Stoney, welcome. Colin is the Regional Partnership Manager from Sport New Zealand, and he actually works across the Lower North Island, across 4 regional sports trusts, and also works with a number of our major stakeholders directly, i.e. The 8 councils across our region. So welcome, Colin.
Thank you, Roger.
The way that we run the collective conversation at Sport Wellington, for those that are new, is we've already started a recording, so we appreciate that many people are working away on their day jobs. They've taken a quick hour out to attend this conversation to get information around a lot of the new funding opportunities. So it's an important conversation, and what we're doing is we're recording it. We will send out the link to the recording so that you can send it to colleagues, be they voluntary or paid, across your organisations and to your board members as well. So we appreciate that this information needs to get to a lot of stakeholders across our region, particularly given the Community Resilience Fund that we'll come to in a minute. That funding is available for organisations that are supporting play, active recreation and sport. So this isn't a fund that's just supporting those that are involved in delivering competitive sport opportunities. If you wouldn't mind, just a reminder to keep your audio off, and also just turn your video off as well. It just helps with the quality of the connection. We're quite a big group on the call today. Thank you very much. Okay, so on the call, Colin Stone I've already mentioned, so thanks Colin for attending. We'll ask Colin to speak in a moment. I also have one of my colleagues, Jamie Leith. So welcome, Jamie. Jamie heads up our funding area at Sport Wellington. And what we're about to do is to actually share a PowerPoint with you. We're just very conscious that at previous collective conversations, we've shared a lot of important information, and we feel that just stepping you through some key messages from within a PowerPoint around the 2 different funds, and then sharing that PowerPoint with you within the next 24 hours so you have the detailed information is really important, particularly that you'll be then going back to your committees, your volunteers and your boards to share the information, as I'm sure you look to chase the funding that's available. So Jamie, welcome. If you wouldn't mind, everybody, Megan and Ella, colleagues of ours as well at Sport Wellington, they are fielding all of the questions. So please just jump in with your questions into the chat function, and we'll work those through towards the end once Jamie and Colin have gone through the key points from the PowerPoint. So Jamie, welcome, and over to you, mate.
Thanks, Roger. Hi all. So a wee bit of context about me. So I'm a partnerships advisor here at Sport Wellington, and as Roger mentioned, looking after both the Community Resilience Fund 2.0 and Tū Manua Active Aotearoa Fund, which will be replacing Kiwi Sport going forward. Just a few things prior to me bringing up the presentation. So as Roger mentioned, there'll be time for questions on both of the funds at the end of my presentation. So happy for you guys to just pop any questions you may have in the chat, and then Megan, my colleague, will be passing through those questions to me that we can hopefully answer for you all. And additionally, we are, as Roger mentioned, going to get Stoney to talk on a couple of slides early on, just to provide you with some big picture context and where these funds have kind of come from. So I will just share my screen now, and then we'll jump straight into it. So Megan, can you just confirm for me you can see that?
Yep, all good.
Perfect, cool. So as mentioned, this presentation will cover the Community Resilience Fund 2.0 and Tū Manua Active Aotearoa Fund. So I'll bring in Colin Stone now just to speak a wee bit around the background of where these funds have come from. So Stoney.
Everyone, yeah, just to give some sort of context for this, I guess we certainly appreciate from our end here at Sport New Zealand that this is kind of confusing if you're sitting on the other side trying to understand the various different funds that are available. So I guess the important thing to say is that in terms of the funds that are available for the community to activate or to latch onto. We're talking about 2 funds, which is obviously what Jamie's going to be covering off later on. But it is in the context of a much bigger piece of work around the 265 million that we obviously received following the budget announcements early on in April. So what I wanted to do was, I guess, just set a little bit of context around some of that. I guess the key thing to say is that all the funding is to ensure that the support flows to all levels of the play, active rec and sports sector, with specific focus on groups who traditionally are less active. So that, and all our sort of research sort of shows us is around women and girls, it's around disabled people and Māori. It's also linked to deprivation as well. So certainly areas of high deprivation are those that have those of the communities that have probably struggled most during COVID. So while this is a relief package, and obviously Jamie will give you some of the details shortly, it is important to say that a lot of this is aligned to our national strategies and our strategic priorities. So one of the things I did want to talk about was the National Partner Support Fund, which is basically a $25 million package. But that's around our national partners. So when we talk about partners for Sport New Zealand, we're talking about organisations that we invest into in a traditional manner. So they can be regional sports organisations, or sorry, regional sports trusts. It can be national partners like national sports organisations or national recreation organisations, or it can be national disability groups. So they're our partner organisations. So the $25 million package is around trying to support those partners for one reason or another who have been challenged, I guess, because of COVID. Now, again, all of this aligns back to our strategy, which I talked about before. So we've got about 24 organisations that we've supported through that fund and are continuing to do so. So from a community perspective, you won't see that, but what it does, it's around, I guess, building the system of play, active rec and sport to enable us to be effective in terms of delivering our strategy, which then enables community funding to flow to also align to that purpose as well. You'll notice through the first slide that there's a tranche around reset rebuild, which is the kind of area we're talking about today. But then there are 2 other areas as well. One is around strengthen and adapt, and that's really around what do we need to do to change the system in the medium term to enable participation to kind of flow. And then the last area is what we've called different and better, which is really around trying to reimagine what the delivery model for sport and active recreation could look like. So while those are more future focused, those 3 areas are happening as we speak now. Now, I don't want to confuse you anymore, but to say that there's a short term, which is the immediate reset and rebuild. There's also a medium term, which is the strengthen and adapt component, but then there's also the longer term, the future focused area, which is really to provide a greater understanding of the likely drivers of change for the sector and how we can respond to them. So that's also around consultation. That's around going out to the sector and understanding key organisations and their contribution towards the sector, but it's also about understanding the environment. So there are a number of thought pieces that are currently sitting on our website. So I would encourage the community and community organisations to look at the Sport New Zealand website. There's a section there called The Future of Play, Active Rec and Sport, and a number of really interesting environmental scans, if you like, across all manner of aspects that affect the play, active rec and sports sector. Be useful for any organisation to have a look at those if they're thinking about what their organisation may look like in the future. So to set the context and scene for this before I hand back over to Jamie, one is around supporting the sector immediately, but the vast majority of this is also around saying how do we build the sustainability of the system moving forward. So that means that the 265 million is not all about going out into the community, it is also about building the system. but the first tranche is very much about reset and rebuild, which are the two areas that Jamie's going to cover off now. So with that, Jamie, having set some context, I'll just pass back over to you. And apologies, folks, I do have to go. I'm due at a council meeting about now, but if there are any questions that come up, and hopefully I haven't confused you anymore, then please fire them through in the normal way, and I'm sure we can, between Sport Wellington and Sport New Zealand, we can deal to those in due course. So with that, I'm afraid I do have to depart, so thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you, Colin. Appreciate your input around that stuff there. So what we'll do now, team, I'll just expand a wee bit on what Colin's touched on. So we're looking very much to it that first of those three tranches, I guess. So reset and rebuild is what we're looking at. This first wave is worth a combined $80 million, which will be invested over the next 4 years. So 54 million of that will be across the 2020/2021 financial year. And again, obviously, the two funds that we'll touch on today through this presentation will be the Tū Manawa Active Aotearoa Fund, which will be replacing Kiwi Sport. That's worth 68 million over 4 years nationally, and then the Community Resilience Fund 2.0, which will be worth 10 million. So we'll jump straight into the Community Resilience Fund 2.0. So seeing as this is currently live at the moment, I'll touch on this fund first. And then the second half of the presentation will be around the Tū Manawa Active Aotearoa Fund. I guess just to reiterate, there is quite a bit of detail on these slides, so we will be providing this slide deck at the end of this conversation, and this conversation is also being recorded, so don't worry too much about scribbling down or taking down all of the information at this point. It'll be supplied after. And I guess just the last point that I'd provide prior to jumping into it is looking after funding for Sport Wellington. I've been involved in a couple of voluntary consultation groups with Sport NZ over the last month or so, working across both of these funds, which has provided great insight for me, but also has been a good chance for me from an RST perspective to feed back into what these funds are kind of looking like. So that's been hugely positive and kind of has impacted the guidelines for both the funds going forward. So jumping into it, so Community Resilience Fund 2.0 will be worth 10 million. CRF1 was worth 15 million nationally. CRF2 will provide further immediate support to a broader range of eligible community-based organisations. So whereas CRF1 was very sport focused in that you had to be affiliated to a Sport NZ national partner, CRF2 will be accessible to play and active recreation organisations also, in addition to sport. It will once again be administered by RSTs, so Sport Wellington will be administering it for this region. And the period that we're looking at is July to September, so 1 July to 30 September. And the fund can cover fixed administration costs as per CRF1, but also some operating costs as well within that period. So there'll be a wee bit more in our upcoming slide around what those operational costs will look like. And the fund is set to provide additional financial help on top of what you as an organisation or club may be receiving up till now. So it can top up government wage subsidy, other sources of funding and support from national bodies. Just continuing with a wee bit of high level detail. So again, building on CRF1, which focused on May till June, so a different 3-month period there. It's not intended for organisations already receiving investment from Sport NZ, so RSTs can't apply. And as per CRF1, it asked organisations to have already reduced costs where possible. So thinking about how you can minimise other costs, use some available cash reserves to mitigate financial situations, and asking for support from national body, etc. So I'm mindful that this is quite lengthy, so I'll take some time to speak to this slide. Again, we are going to provide all of these notes after, so don't worry too much about recording all of it. But some key changes in here from CRF1. So fixed administration costs as per CRF1 can be covered, as well as some operating costs. Sport NZ have ended up excluding salaries and wages. So as examples of what can be covered includes utilities, rental facilities hire, rates and other costs critical to your program delivery. Another important change from CRF1, you can, as an organisation, claim a prorated share, so up to 25%, and that reflects the 3-month period that we're looking at for this fund, of audit fees and insurance premiums only. So the prorated share can only cover those 2 expenses, so just keep that in mind. A massive one, and I guess something that we think is positive in its inclusion, is the inclusion of affiliation fees. So a lot of feedback we were receiving as a RST around CRF1 was affiliation fees and why can't these be covered. So Sport NZ have kind of gained or received some feedback, I guess, from RSTs through those voluntary consultation groups over the last month or so, and have included affiliation fees that are payable, again, within that period there. And that's only if they have not been covered by other relief, such as regional or national organisation waiving the affiliation fees. And I guess just an important note that Sport NZ will be monitoring the application for affiliation fees and may verify the charge with your affiliated organisation. So please just be mindful of that. Another important consideration, so the amount awarded will be decided on a case-by-case basis, and the cap for CRF2 is 25k, and that's across the board. So for those of you familiar with CRF1, there were 2 application forms, so one for local or clubs, and then one for regional organisations. So the club or local limit was $1,000 for CRF1, and then for regional organisations it was up to 40k. For CRF2, the cap across the board, so regardless of whether you're a local organisation or a regional organisation, across play, active rec or sport, is 25k. So again, there's just the one application form there. And we as RST think that's beneficial and something we advocated to Sport NZ very early on about. I guess if I provide one practical example, we were getting a lot of golf clubs apply in CRF1. And they'd quite often have, you know, in excess of, say, $2 million turnover per year. But because they were classed as a club or a local organisation, they could only claim up to 1,000. So I guess with that said, that was kind of fed back to Sport NZ, and it's good to see that the amount across the board has increased to 25k. That next point kind of just speaks to what we are asking or what we are assessing eligible applications against, I guess. So we're asking to see evidence of financial hardship. And again, there's a wee bit more detail in the guidelines that are up on our website at the moment. We're asking to see evidence of actions already taken to minimise financial impact, which I touched on briefly before. Reasonableness of the amount included, and again, will require financial statements as part of your application so we can assess that. And then we'll also look at what costs were claimed, if at all, through CRF1, which looked at an earlier portion of the year. And then that last point there just speaks to, in addition to the above, so if you're applying for more than 5k, Sport NZ will consider evidence of financial hardship. And in the CRF2 guidelines, there's a wee bit of a definition around financial hardship there. Who cannot apply? So first time round, and this went for who can apply as well as the expenses that could be claimed. Sport NZ included a list, but because it was the first time they were administering the fund, they were continuously adding to that list. Once they kind of got feedback from RSTs to say, oh, can this be considered? Can these people apply, etc. So what they've done now is provided a list of who cannot apply, and then essentially anyone outside of that can. So individual or sole traders. Again, I won't touch on every single point here, but school education institutions, again, remembering these cannot apply. Professional sports teams, for-profit businesses or commercial organisations, sports academies, facilities, or managers, owners. Importantly, I guess, and it kind of falls under that active rec lens, community hubs can apply also for Community Resilience Fund 2.0. And again, in the guidelines, there's a definition around play, and there's a definition around sports hubs as well. So I would encourage you, if you're one of those types of organisations, to go and have a wee look at the guidelines there. It spells it out quite nicely. Territorial authorities or local authorities, other government agencies, organisations that receive NZ Partnerships investment for 20/2021, and then the piece there around the Exceptional System Support Fund. Again, so as I mentioned before, this time around for Community Resilience Fund 2.0, they've included a list of what cannot be covered by the fund. And then essentially anything outside of that within reason can be covered. So what cannot be covered, again, costs related to new programs or events, costs incurred outside of that 1 July to 30 September period, again, with the exception being that prorated share of audit fees and insurance premiums only. And then there's that piece around the affiliation fees there within that period, 1 April to 30 September. Again, costs that can't be covered, any costs essentially associated with professional athletes, professional sports teams, academies, rep teams, or groups competing nationally or internationally. Costs covered by other relief arrangements, annual general meeting costs, capital costs, purchase of equipment or uniforms can't be covered. Again, wages or salary can't be. And again, that was in discussion that Sport NZ had. They're initially thinking about potentially including that, but because there is some overlap with the government wage subsidy into the period that the CRF2 is looking to provide support for, in addition to kind of it was going to be quite tedious administratively for RSTs to kind of assess how much applicants were applying for in that area, they've ended up excluding those. Staff training and PD can't be covered, loan repayments or financing costs, and then prize giving and photos. So this is just a bit of a recap. So all of this information you've seen already, but these are what I pulled out or kind of helped me wrap my head around what the key differences were between CRF1 and CRF2. So again, the cap that you can apply for has changed. So any one applicant can apply for up to $25,000. There's no regional or local organisation specific limits. So where, as I mentioned before, if you're applying for over 5K, there's a wee check around financial hardship. And again, there's a bit of an explanation in the guidelines around that. If you're applying for under 5K, the application form is slightly easier in that there's essentially less checks for an RST to do on that application. So I guess Sport NZ have included that, being mindful of there will still be a lot of local or smaller organisations applying that are often like volunteer driven. So they've taken into account that and just made the application form slightly easier for them. So it is still the same application form. It's just less checks if you're applying for under 5K essentially. The scope has extended of who can apply. So active recreation, including community hubs, as well as play organisations, in addition to sport, as per CRF1, can be covered by CRF2, and you don't have to be affiliated to Sport NZ. So again, if you're a play or active rec or community hub, I would encourage you to go and visit those guidelines on our website because it spells out a wee bit of a definition and what's required around those groups there. They've extended the expenses that can be applied for as well, so inclusion of some operating costs incurred in that period, in addition to the fixed administration costs as per CRF1. And then finally, again, I've touched on it a couple of times, so you can claim a pro-rated share up to 25% of audit fees and insurance premiums only. So just the final details around CRF2. So the CRF2 went live on Monday, August 3rd and closes September 4th. What I would say, just as a bit of RST insight from Sport Wellington's perspective, we've had quite a quick or large uptake, I guess, of CRF2 so far. So if you are looking to apply, I would encourage you to do so as soon as possible. And that's probably with that second point in mind. So the fund will operate as a rolling fund as per CRF1, and the funds will be distributed on a first come, first served basis. So either until the application close date, so September 4, or which I would probably say is more likely until the total investment amount has been distributed. So again, there's probably a wee bit of urgency to get your applications in if possible. Again, so we're going to jump into Tūmanua now. I will answer all questions regarding both CRF2 that I've just reviewed, in addition to Tūmanua at the end of this presentation. So if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat now, and then we can answer them towards the end of this. So a wee bit around Tūmanua. Some of these details are still being worked on through consultation groups with Sport NZ, but we have the high level detail for you. And I guess just as a bit of insight, this fund will go live later in August. So just keep an eye out for that. We'll obviously communicate all the details through our Sport Wellington website to you all. So Tūmanua Active Aotearoa will be replacing Kiwi Sport, but I think it's best if you consider it a whole separate fund. And there are some key changes which I'll touch on as we move through this presentation. So 68 million over 4 years for the activation fund called Tūmanua. 34 of that is from the sector recovery package, which I touched on briefly and Colin spoke to at the start of this presentation, with the remaining 34 from existing Sport NZ baselines. The total amount available for distribution over 2020/2021 is 16 million, and then each region has their own allocation from within this total. So each RST will receive a proportion of that from within that total. The meaning behind Tūmanua, so Tū is to stand and Manua is breath, and that's taken within the context of play, active, rec and sport. And the fund aims to support the provision of and access to quality play, active, rec and sport opportunities for tamariki and rangatahi, with an emphasis on those that are missing out, particularly in higher deprivation areas. A wee bit more around the high level detail. So identification of priority population groups have been informed by Sport NZ's research over time and may change, so just be mindful of that. For the next year, Sport NZ have said they will include Māori, girls and young women, disabled young people, as well as tamariki and rangatahi and whānau living in high-debt communities. And additionally, and this was quite an important point and cool to see the inclusion of from Sport NZ's end, Sport NZ's research during COVID kind of showed that there were some groups who are more at risk of missing out or being less active. And they also saw that one group in particular was down on physical activity levels, and that was that young woman aged 19 to 24-year-old age group. So they have included, with COVID in mind, I guess the impact of COVID in mind, Sport NZ have included that as a priority group for the first year of funding. And as that point mentions there, that will be reviewed before 30th of June 2021. So that's something new that didn't happen. There wasn't a focus on that through Kiwi Sport, so it's quite cool to see the inclusion of that group there. The fund welcomes applications from organisations whose primary purpose is to provide play, active, rec or sport opportunities, which I've kind of touched on before, or those who support that provision through the normal course of their operation. So as you can probably get a sense of already, Tūmanua is more focused around, or it's got an increased emphasis on play and active rec organisations in addition to sport. And then the fund will be distributed by RSTs as per Kiwi Sport, so it'll be through Sport Wellington for this region. Who can apply? So there's a wee bit there. Iwi, marae, hapu or Māori organisations can apply, incorporated societies, charitable trusts, regional or local council, for-profit businesses or community organisations and social enterprises, and then education settings can apply. So I guess an important consideration is that second to last point there. So, and this has kind of changed from Kiwi Sport. So where a project or program is to be delivered during class time in a school, only that school can apply for the funding. And a school checklist, which is a document that Sport NZ have put together in collaboration with the Healthy Active Learning Initiative, will need to be completed as well. So again, once all of this detail goes live later this month on our Sport Wellington website, you guys will all get a sense of more what that school checklist looks like and the requirements around that. As a wee bit of context, I know the Minister didn't want a complete departure from in-curriculum time delivery. I guess for me, having administered Kiwi Sport over the last the last year or so, there's been a move outside of curriculum time, just with the Healthy Active Learning Initiative moving into schools and kind of assisting teachers with their PD and around that PE time, and just supporting their development in that space. So what they have done, again, rather than a complete departure from in-curriculum time, there's essentially just more of a check. So how I see that playing out practically from an RST perspective is, say an organisation wanted to deliver in curriculum time, it'll probably be a case of prior to the application being submitted to us, it'll be a sit down potentially between myself, a representative from the organisation, the external organisation looking to deliver, a representative from the school, whoever that may be, and then probably we'd look to link in one of our Healthy Active Learning team as well into that discussion. And then that school checklist will be completed kind of collectively, I guess, just to promote some conversations around that space there. And then that last point kind of touches on for activity that's in a school setting but isn't in curriculum time, so whether that's before, after school, or within break time, the application can still be submitted by any organisation. Who cannot apply? So national organisations that receive partnership investment from Sport NZ, individuals, professional or semi-professional sports teams and organisations, government agencies and their regional branches, and early learning services. What can be funded? So again, it's an activation fund intended to help cover program or service delivery costs. RSTs, I guess on behalf of Sport NZ, so again, it's Sport NZ's fund that RSTs are administering regionally, are interested in receiving applications that take innovative approaches to engaging the outline priority groups that I touched on before. And again, that can be across play, active rec, or sport experiences. So what that means at, I guess, a practical level is project or program delivery costs can be covered. So like venue or equipment hire, transport to an event. Equipment can be covered, officials where they are required for the delivery of that opportunity, and delivery of staff wages. And that must be for the person or people that are involved directly in planning and delivering that project or program. What will not be covered? Costs of retrospective programs won't be. That second point, I know potentially might be a big one for a lot of you. So multi-year programs at this point can't be covered. So we're just looking at funding 12-month initiatives, I guess, or up to 12-month initiatives for this first year. And I guess some of the reasoning behind that is, again, going back to an earlier slide, Sport NZ are going to look to review those priority groups around mid next year. So because of the potential of them potentially changing, I guess, going forward, Sport NZ have asked RSTs to just cover up to 1 year of funding at this point in time. I guess if there's initiatives out there, and I know there are through meetings I've had previously through Kiwi Sport and whatnot, if some of you have, say, a 3-year program in mind, what it would probably look like practically is if you were to submit an application, we'd probably still look to see your 3-year plan, for example, but we would just be able to fund the first year in the first instance. Costs associated with professional athletes, sports teams, academies, or rep teams are out, so they can't be covered. Again, capital expenditure or capital costs can't be. Admin or ongoing costs, again, wages or salaries that for staff that are not involved in the planning or delivery of the project can't be covered. And then medals, prizes, giveaways, and spot prizes can't be. And that last point I've kind of touched on already, so it just talks to the multi-year programs aspect. And that we can just fund up to 12 months at the moment. Objectives of your organisation. So I guess the general consensus is with Tū Manua, there's a wee bit of a broadened focus in terms of who can apply. And with that, Sport NZ have kind of popped some criteria around what the objectives of your organisation needs to be in order to be able to apply for this fund. So you need to be meeting one of the 4 bullet points provided below. A lot of you, I imagine, on this call would probably meet that first one, with your primary purpose being to provide play, active rec or sport opportunities for, again, that tamariki o rangatahi, I guess, age groups, particularly with a focus on those less active or missing out. Second point around providing play, active rec or sport is an important and mandated part of your function. And there's some examples there. Organisations that provide, again, play, active rec and sport opportunities for those age groups we're looking at in a kaupapa Māori context. And then the last one's just around organisations that can demonstrate relationships and impact, working with priority groups, and then want to co-design and deliver play, active rec and sport opportunity. So again, those are all outlined in the guidelines that you'll see later this month that go live. But it's being mindful that you're meeting one of those 4. And I guess this, when I initially saw this information, kind of helped me, from an administration perspective, wrap my head around what the key differences are between Kiwi Sport and Tū Manua. Again, so we'll be supplying you guys with all of this information, and there'll be more that comes out later this month. The Kiwi Sport Regional Partnership Fund has been in place since 2009 and ends at the end of this year. So Sport Wellington don't have any existing funding to allocate. We've allocated all of our existing investment to programs that are currently delivering through to the end of this year. So for those of you that have Kiwi Sport contracts, that Kiwi Sport email address and stuff will still be all live, and we'll still be asking for reporting and whatnot through to the end of the year. Tū Manua is a new fund, so again, I would encourage you all to think of it as a new fund because it has slightly different criteria. It's not simply an enhanced version of Kiwi Sport. It's probably an important message, and it kind of touches on it in the below points here. So Tū Manua will support a wider range of activity opportunities, again, with an increased emphasis on play and active recreation, and is more clearly pointed at those who are less active or missing out. The organisations eligible to apply have been broadened in recognition of their crucial role in providing these opportunities. And probably from my perspective, this next point is the biggest one. So Tū Manua is less focused on more people and opportunities and more focused on quality experiences that will encourage participation for life. So for those of you that are familiar with Kiwi Sport or potentially have been funded through Kiwi Sport in the past, there has been quite a big focus on numbers in terms of how many sessions you're delivering, how many participants you're delivering to, how many participation opportunities you're providing through your initiative. And that's even impacted on, I guess, in the past decisions in terms of when an application comes to the assessment panel to be assessed. That's something that we have looked at internally. So for your investment that you're asking for, how many participation opportunities are you providing through your initiative? So not to say that that won't be a complete non-focus for Tū Manua, but is very much for Tū Manua more focus on quality experiences. So the more that you can meet those priority groups outlined and kind of meet their needs and cater for those, again, that are missing out, I think that'll strengthen your application. And then that last point, so where Kiwi Sport was a partnership fund that required additional revenue sources, Tū Manua Active Aotearoa does not have this requirement. So that's a pretty big one as well. And again, if I'm speaking practically to some of you that would have been funded in the past, you would have had to top up your investment that you've asked for Kiwi Sport through with your own investment or investment from elsewhere. So that Tū Manua does not have that requirement moving forward. Final details. So just from RSC perspective, as mentioned, Tū Manua will go live later this month. And we'll have detail including the fund guidelines, FAQ documents, fact sheets, and more to be able or they'll be made available on the Sport Wellington website again later this month. So we'll probably look at holding some practical sessions with our community as well. So just keep an eye out for that. So whether that's forums or the like, or individual meetings, whatever the case may be, there'll be more information on that closer to the time. And then probably, again, these aren't set in stone as of yet, so hence why I've kind of put likely around some of that stuff. But the initial thinking is we'll likely distribute our regional allocation of Tū Manua via funding rounds, similar to how we have done with Kiwi Sport in the past. Again, through Kiwi Sport in the past, it's been 3 to 4 funding rounds per 12-month period, with applications kind of being reviewed by an assessment panel at the end of each funding round, which have typically been open for about a month or so, with recommendations then being made to the board for approval. So it'll likely operate in that case, but also Sport NZ have asked all RSTs to implement a fast fund. So again, for those of you familiar with the Kiwi Sport Fast Fund, it will likely operate similar to that. Most likely have a cap of $10,000 and focus on, so it still has the same priority groups and same overall focus that the main fund will have, I guess, but we'll focus on smaller or pilot initiatives with potential room for expansion in future. And the key differences between the fast fund and the funding rounds is the fast fund will be open year round, with applications being able to be approved by the assessment panel, so they don't have to go to the board for sign off. Last slide. So specific questions regarding the Sport NZ Community Resilience Fund can be directed to that email there. So we've set that up to answer any of your guys' specific queries. So whether that's around can this be included, or organisation specific queries, I guess, can be directed there. And then we will set up a Tū Manua specific inbox for any queries, and just kind of to assist with that transition from Kiwi Sport to Tū Manua later in the month once the fund becomes live. So conscious that I've probably covered off a lot of information there. So again, just to reiterate, we will be providing you guys with the slide deck, and there's a recording of this as well. But happy now to take any questions, Megan, that may have come through on the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. We've had quite a few questions come through, so I'll just whip through them. The first one is asking, while you can claim audit fees and insurance for the period of April to September, that would be more than 25% of the year, but is the amount claimable limited to 25% for the Community Resilience Fund?
Yeah, that's right. So for audit fees, it's just that prorated share, so 25%. And I guess that's reflecting the 3-month period that the fund is looking at, I guess.
Awesome. Another question about lost earnings. So what about, can organisations apply for profits they would have lost from not being able to run events or programs anymore, which are a huge part of their income?
Yeah, good question. And that's something that was discussed actually yesterday in a drop-in session with Sport NZ. So I believe the stance, and I can update this on our website if need be, I believe the stance on that is if it's lost earnings from a program that was already existing, so it's not a new program that you've just implemented this year, but if it's kind of a reoccurring program and the costs are within the period that the fund is looking for, then yes, we can look to cover those expenses.
Awesome. Has Sport NZ given any parameters for distributing the Community Resilience Fund to play, active rec and sport organisations? So a certain percentage to each type of organisation, or is it completely first come, first serve?
It's completely first come, first serve for CRF. So yeah, they've just extended the scope of who can apply, but they haven't said how much needs to go out. And yeah, I guess the question kind of answers itself in terms of it is first come, first served.
Cool. Does Sport Wellington know what Sport NZ is planning beyond the 30th of September, given many of the financial impacts of COVID-19 will be hitting many summer sports in springtime?
I am unaware. It's probably one for Colin potentially, or Sport NZ themselves. I guess as far as I can comment is there were those 3 kind of tranches of funding that we touched on at the start. So there may potentially be further support coming through one of those, but I'm unaware of specifics. Yeah.
Cool. Does CRF 2.0 cover gyms for active and wellbeing community?
What I would probably encourage you to do in that space is refer to the community guidelines. So as mentioned, there's some really good definitions and criteria around what they're asking for in that active rec community hub play space. So if you want to jump on our website and view the guidelines, that will probably provide you with some further detail around that stuff there.
Awesome. If a sport club can potentially apply under CRF 2.0, but we also have a large number of tamariki and rangatahi who are in deprivation areas, can they also apply for Tū Manawa Active Aotearoa?
For sure, yeah. So the two funds are very different in the purpose, I guess. So CRF is very much kind of off the back of COVID and understanding the impact that that has had. And then Tū Manawa is more, I guess, an activation fund. So the purpose of the both funds are very different. So I guess long story short, to answer your question, yes, you can apply for both of the funds.
Cool. And this is the last question we've had through today. Do you know when Sport NZ will decide when they'll review their priority groups? With a comment saying that stakeholders will need to plan at least 3 months before the end of year one when they're rolling out their programs regionally.
Yeah, definitely understand that. I think I had it in there, I believe it was June 2021 or around that time that they'll look to reassess those priority groups for Tū Manawa and then provide RSTs with some guidance around whether they're going to stay the same or change or whatever the case may be. So I believe it's June 2021.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. Those are all the questions we had come through today.
Cool. Awesome. No worries. If anyone has any additional questions, again, that CRF inbox is an option for us to answer any queries regarding that. And then probably just keep an eye out for further information regarding Tū Manawa to come up on our website later this month.
We've just had one more question come through asking, can small clubs who don't have a charitable status but exist under a sports hub association, can the Sports Hub Association apply on their behalf for the Community Resilience Fund?
Good question. Again, I would probably refer to the guidelines again on our website because there is, if I'm thinking to the specific definition of community hubs, I think it's asking for like 2 entities or organizations to be operating out of that community hub. So probably your first port of call would be those guidelines. And then any further queries about like beyond that, I guess, would just flick them through to that email address that I popped up. Sport NZ have provided a CRS specific email address for us to answer queries that we're unsure of as well. So if there's anything that comes through that we're unsure of the answer through for, we'll go to Sport NZ and get back to you regarding that.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie.
Cool.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Great job. Definitely a deep knowledge there. And as Jamie said, everybody, the slides will be going out. And I just want to let you know that for those that have been on this call previously, Colin Stone often sort of jokes about it, but we are genuinely sort of pushing to get you the information as fast as possible. So having this collective conversation today, sharing this content, you've already heard that when it comes to the Community Resilience Fund 2.0, that a whole number of applications have already come in because it went live this week. So we're on standby. You can contact us with any questions to help you with that process and take any sort of pain away and make it as easy as possible. So thanks, Jamie, and also thanks to Colin Stone as well from Sport NZ for attending. I'm just aware that the primary purpose of this chat was around updating you on Tū Manawa Active Aotearoa and also the CRF 2.0 as we call it. Just another 2 quick updates and we'll let you go and enjoy the sunshine. The first is that Sport Wellington, and it's a group that I'm chairing, we're still chairing the regional recovery group. So some of you may be aware that 4 months ago we set up a regional response group, and that is the 8 councils, 5 health partners, including 3 DHBs, and also a number of our major sports represented on there as well as Y Central. We have really changed our focus to recovery, hence now sort of renaming ourselves as the Regional Recovery Group. We've got 9 projects that we are collaborating on that we can do a much better job of by doing them together, as you'd hope we would be doing. And Sport Wellington has to provide really effective leadership in this regard. So that Regional Recovery Group, we're meeting tomorrow. We meet monthly. And then by middle of next week, when Megan sends out our e-newsletter, there'll be a click through in that you can go through and see what are those 9 pieces of work and who's leading them, who's involved, and what's their status. So we're going to be really, really transparent with all of our stakeholders as to the work that's going on and the status. Because if there is one real positive that came out of essentially alert level 4 and 3 and the onset of COVID and the pandemic, that is that there's been more collaboration than ever before. So it's our role to make sure that we keep that momentum with that collaboration. So it'll go out next week in our e-newsletter. If you're not signed up to our e-newsletter, I would encourage you to do it. info@sportwellington.org.nz. Lots of good information in there, and it's real time, as we call it at Sport Wellington. So we look to make sure it's as relevant as possible. The very last thing is, over the next week, some communication will go out, probably in the e-newsletter as well, but certainly in the next week on our website. We've made a number of organisational changes at Sport Wellington, and we're still going through them. And a lot of those have been informed by really the what we learned through COVID-19, particularly alert level 4 and 3, really what our major stakeholders need from Sport Wellington. So we're responding to what we learned. We've made a number of organisational changes. We're recruiting to 2 or 3 new roles, and we've disestablished a number of other roles as well. So we're looking to essentially make sure we're fit for purpose and providing greater value outside of our building to our stakeholders. But some info go on our site over the next week about that. I know we're getting a number of good questions around that. People are hearing about it. So listen, just to wrap up, thank you very much, Jamie, again. Great job. It'd be good to get the slides out to everybody as soon as possible. So you got that information, particularly given there's really, really keen interest in CRF 2.0 from our stakeholders. So great job. Okay, thanks everybody for dialing in. This Teams communication platform, it's proving super handy over these last 4 months. So enjoy the rest of your week and enjoy the sunshine. It's a stunning